Today on the Daily Breakdown, the Business Council of Australia releases a useless, pointless, fact-free report into climate change. No wonder the left grabbed hold of it, but we'll take it apart. And sanity returns to COVID policy, slowly but surely, I think. But all is not well in Queensland. Just what has Anastasia Unspellable been up to? You're listening to the Daily Breakdown, the week that went for the week that was. Let's do it. Welcome to the Daily Breakdown. I'm your host, David Murtagh, and we're going to start today with the big report that came out during the week from the Business Council of Australia. This was fantastic. It was everywhere. And when these big reports come out, you've got to understand the way the media works. They get the big reports, and all the journalists go, oh, for God's sake, really? God, I've got lunch booked at 12. I wanted to leave at 4. How on earth am I going to write this report? So what they do is they either go to the executive summary, which smart people do, because it's down to 3 or 4 pages, or if they're super lazy, they go just to the media release because that's even shorter than the executive summary. Idiots read the entire 79-page report. How do I know it's 79 pages? Lucky guess. I read the damn thing, and it is... Okay, I didn't read all of it. I read most of it, and it is garbage, which is probably why so many environmentalists have grabbed hold of it and said, here we have the proof that the Business Council of Australia has come on board and they're going to change the way they do things. We're going to meet all of our targets. Everyone's on board. The only way you can believe that is if you didn't read the report. Because there is nothing in this thing. If they actually paid serious dollars for it, if they paid more than a McDonald's Happy Meal for this report, they got ripped off. Let me give you an example. And these are the numbers that have been quoted extensively in the media, again, because these are the headline figures. And the Business Council made this one really simple. They've got a heading, they call it the payoff. And I'm going to read you this section in the payoff. It's only a couple of pars, but it indicates just how garbage the analysis is and how terrible these forecasts are. Because it took me, I'm not joking here, 5 minutes of research to put this into perspective. And when you get perspective, you can see how tiny and pathetic their big, bright future is. It's not that great. It's not that big, bright and shiny. They are clutching at straws. Let me give you an example. They say, over the next 50 years, modelling by Deloitte Access Economics estimates that the economic dividend from a smooth transition to net zero emissions by 2050, aligned to our proposed strategy, that's the BCA strategy, is estimated to be an $890 billion increase to GDP at net present value due to higher productivity levels and over 195,000 additional jobs by 2070. Let me tell you why that figure is garbage. In 2020, our GDP was $1.4 trillion. GDP, everything we produced, $1.4 trillion. In 1995, 25 years ago, our GDP was $400 billion. So without doing a single thing in that period, without, you've lived probably through all of that. We had some technological advances. We had the China boom. We paid off a whole lot of our debt. We had amazing years of unprecedented economic growth. And it still went up by $1 trillion. And that's $1 trillion in old money when you can actually buy something with it. So we could assume that in the next 30 years, when money is going to be worth less, we are going to go up by a lot more than $890 billion. It shouldn't be that hard. But then they say we're going to have an extra 195,000 additional jobs by 2070. You'd bloody well hope so. In fact, you'd better hope we do about 200,000 jobs every single year, because that's the amount of people we bring in over the amount who leave. So we have to create at least 200,000 jobs a year, or else unemployment is going to go up. And they're applauding this. It could create an extra 195,000 jobs by 2070. In 50 years' time, 4,000 jobs a year on average. That's your big dividend. That's the payoff. You got to do better than that. It goes on. On average, Australians are around $5,000 better off per person in the year 2050 in today's dollars, with regional Australians projected to be the disproportionately better off than the national average. You would hope that in 30 years, you are more than $5,000 better off. That is no big deal. As we often say here at The Breakdown, the median income in Australia is $85,000 a year. If you get a 2 or 3% pay rise for the next 4 years, you're way more than $5,000 ahead. What are they selling here? This is almost like they went to the bottom of the birdcage and thought, oh, thank God, we found something. Put that up in lights. This is not a big selling point. Then the next paragraph. The potential investment between now and 2030 to transform the electricity grid, leaving aside required investments in other sectors, could be in the order of $50 billion for new renewable generation assets alone. This doesn't include the significant capex requirements also required in transmission, storage, network augmentation, and system stability and security services. Now, that last bit, transmission, storage, network augmentation, and system stability and security, that means we're not going to be spending $50. But you see, these are not $50 billion we want to spend. This is replacing stuff that is currently working or is efficient but doesn't meet this new green dream. So they're going to get rid of it and replace it with unreliable energy, which is why they say it doesn't include the significant capex requirements for transmission. That's because our grid was built to be a one-way system. You have a central producer of electricity and it gets pumped into your house. Over the last 10 or so years, that one-way system has had to accommodate traffic two ways because many of your houses are producing solar power. That's putting a strain on the transmission system. Why do we need storage? Well, we need battery power for backup to help create system stability because of the unreliability and the unpredictability of renewables. These are not big selling points. These are costs that we don't currently have. Now, you could explain that $50 billion away by saying, well, we do need to upgrade our power stations. A lot of our power stations that were built with a 30-year life are now coming up to 50, 60 years. They have to be replaced, and it turns out that the timing of their replacement is going to work well with renewables. But it means that when they're replaced with renewables, you are taking something which is efficient and reliable and replacing it with something which is inefficient and unreliable, unpredictable. So you've got to spend all this extra money to augment the system. And part of that, in addition to transmission and storage, is the ability for network producers, the big energy providers, to use the smart meter you've paid for to put on your house. You may not know you paid for it, but you did. So they can switch off your air conditioner in the middle of summer so the whole network doesn't go down. These are not good things for the system. These indicate the unreliability of renewables. But we know this. If you've been listening to The Breakdown before, you would know that an electricity system can be sustainable, it can be reliable, and it can be efficient. But you only get to pick two of them. At the moment, we have a system which is reliable and which is cheap, but it doesn't meet the green dreams. So it's got to go. But it is not being replaced like for like. We are going to lose a lot of reliability. And then they say that the greater penetration of renewables in the grid will result in lower electricity prices for consumers, while market reforms will ensure reliability and security of the system is maintained. Well, we'll see. We'll see if we actually do get lower electricity prices. I doubt it. Because the people who are investing tens of billions of dollars, they're going to want a return on investment. And so far, the way they get their return on investment is they go to the government and say, give us lots of money, give us lots of customers as well. But I just want to come back to this 195,000 additional jobs, which is ludicrous. I have looked through this report. They say, apparently, we are going to get some new jobs in green steel. I don't know why they think we're going to become an exporter of green steel when we can't even make it now, when we've got the iron ore in Australia and we've got the coal in Australia. They're dreaming. And that is about as close to an area of future export demand that they can find. But we are being sold a dream. There are no specifics about where we can actually master this new universe. Here's Chris Bowen speaking last week. And again, no specifics.
This report from the Business Council of Australia confirms what Labor has said all along, that the world's climate emergency is Australia's jobs opportunity. The fact of the matter is we are in a race. We are in a race to become a global renewable superpower. It's a race that Scott Morrison isn't turning up to. Just like he's left it too late on vaccines, he's leaving it too late on a renewable economy. If we get in front of that race, we can create thousands of jobs and create lots of investment and economic growth. And as this report confirms, most of that will be in Australia's regions. The regions that have powered Australia for so long. The regions with the space for big renewable installations, with the access to the electricity grid. These are the regions that will power a renewable Australia.
So that was the clip put out by Chris Bowen's office, and apparently he did it in a wind tunnel. Where are these jobs? How are we going to become an energy superpower? And you know, maybe I'm missing something here, but I can see how we are an energy superpower supplying gas and coal. We dig it out of the ground, we put it on a big floaty thing, and we send it off to people who burn it. That makes sense to me. Now, there is a theory that we're going to have this giant bank, these hundreds, thousands of acres of solar panels in the Northern Territory, and we're going to be supplying power with a big extension cord to Singapore. That's Mike Cannon-Brookes' dream. Now, I ran the figures on this a couple of years ago on the back of an envelope, and it doesn't look like it can make any sense at all when you look at the cost of undersea cables. And Singapore is not going to put all of their energy security in Australia's hands, because it means if you cut the cable, Singapore goes dark. And Singaporeans are not stupid. We're stupid. No one ever says that about them. So I don't know how we're going to become an energy superpower. When you look at who, China has sunshine, and China produces wind turbines, and China has cornered the market in solar panels. How he thinks we are going to do this at an efficient price and compete is beyond me. But there's never a specific. They always talk in terms of a grand vision. Because if they actually got down to brass tacks, if they said it's going to be in lithium production, or we're going to be mining fairy dust, whatever it is, people could actually run the numbers. But they have to be as vague as possible, because then they can't be held to account for this. Now, it is 100% true that our GDP between now and 2050 is going to go up by at least $890 billion. Is it going to be related to this stuff? No. Are we going to create 195,000 jobs between here and 2070? No. We're going to create millions upon millions upon millions. And we may have a few jobs created in green areas. But the reality is there are fewer jobs in green industries than there are in fossil fuel industries, in the coal mining industry. Coal mining is more people intensive than solar panels, mainly because most of the jobs are over in China producing the things. But as we've said here before as well, the point of coal mines is not to employ people. The point of coal mines is to make the electricity go when you flick the switch. which is a very technical description of how it works. It is not about job creation. It is an enabling industry. And what it is being replaced by, based on current technology, based on what current prices, what we know, it cannot compete. How do I know this? Because of a story sent to me during the week by a listener from mining.com. Here is the heading. Now, this is true. This is from a specialist journal. And the specialist journals can't BS with generalist crap the way publications do and the way they do in The Guardian, or aka the slave trader. Heading: coal price surges to record as global scramble for energy accelerates. Coal prices soared to their highest on record as China accelerated a global struggle for resources that has brought the dirtiest fossil fuel roaring back. High-quality thermal coal, which is what we produce, loaded on ships at Newcastle Port in Australia, surged to $203.20 a tonne, breaking the previous record set in July 2008, which from memory, that was after there were floods in Queensland. And there was a global shortage of coal because we're usually the first, second or third biggest exporter. So prices surged because we weren't in the market, but we're in the market now as prices are at $203.20 a tonne. That's the benchmark price for Asia, the world's largest market for the fuel by far. The rally comes during a global energy crunch that's hitting China, the world's biggest coal producer and consumer, especially hard. And as gas prices spike higher in Europe, there's been a resurgence in demand for the fossil fuel that the continent's policymakers have long been trying to phase out. Still, there isn't enough coal to go around, which is why the price went up. A German electricity producer closed one of its plants early after it ran out of coal. Ran out in Germany. And if you know your history in Germany, they're pretty big on coal. Earlier this week, Chinese Premier Han Zheng, perfect pronunciation, ordered state-owned energy giants to secure fuel supplies for winter at any cost. Oh, not secure windmills at any cost. Quick, we need solar panels for winter. No. China consumes and mines half the world's coal, and it's also the world's largest importer. The government told miners to keep digging even if they've exceeded their annual quota. Keep this in mind when you hear about all that China's doing to meet their global targets. Because when the rubber hits the road, they don't want their people to go cold. Because here's the thing about the Chinese government, the CCP. They have to keep their population happy. If you're going to be living under a boot, you want to be warm, you want to be fed, there has to be a payoff. So if you're going to live under the scrutiny of Xi Jinping's CCP, you want to have a few of life's luxuries. You don't want to be living the same life your parents lived when they were living under Mao Zedong. Things have to be getting better. The CCP knows this. They are very responsive. Prices for thermal coal, tracked by IHS Markit and Argus, have since surged since late 2020 as demand rebounded from the depths of the pandemic and with substitute fuels like natural gas becoming more expensive. The emissions-heavy fuel is back in vogue just weeks before the nations gather in Scotland for the COP26 summit on climate change. Supply issues also boosted prices. China has struggled to raise output amid tighter safety controls following fatal accidents. This comes back to the thing about people want to be happy. They're not happy if they're going to work and they're not going back home. So China is improving safety in the mines. And torrential rains, labour problems and transportation bottlenecks have hampered exports from countries such as Indonesia, Australia, Colombia and South Africa, among others. The gains come as the world plans to shift away from the emissions-intensive fuel in favour of renewable resources. It will help reach net zero targets. Even China aims to start reducing domestic consumption by 2026, and President Xi Jinping pledged to stop building new coal-fired powered plants abroad. I imagine if he started them, he's going to finish them, just like the questions on Mastermind. In the short term, for coal, demand in nations is proving resilient. thermal power generation in China was 14% higher in the year through August than in the previous 2 years. Demand in 2022 could be marginally higher than this year, rising about 1%, according to a coal analyst with Wood Mackenzie. In other words, we have been told China is moving away from coal. It is possible they will, but they are not going to move away if it means their people can't buy energy, if they can't produce reliably because they're not going to shut down factories. They don't like doing that. We, on the other hand, we are prepared to do anything so our leaders can go to COP26 and get a nice little pat on the head. And Malcolm Turnbull will go there, God knows why, and he'll probably be crapping on the Australian government from a great height, saying how absolutely terrible we are. That we, if only he were Prime Minister, we'd have we'd be absolutely net neutral. We'd be, sucking up other people's carbon. If only we had the great Malcolm Turnbull. But the problem is, we are going to be doing this at the same time as countries like China are not going to be taking it as seriously because they know they can't be held to account. And you get these garbage reports from groups like the Business Council that get a whole lot of people very, very excited. But when you look at the reality of it, it is not that great. Now, that's not to say that we aren't going to reduce our emissions, and we have been over time. But you don't do it for pats overseas. You don't do it for praise from people who don't matter. And you certainly don't do it to get a pat on the bum from people who aren't going to be imposing the same draconian measures on their economies. But we will, because we're not very bright. Another area where Australia has been less than impressive is in the area of COVID. I thought we started off well, but we had one trick and we just kept playing it and playing it. We should have done more when we were closed off from the rest of the world. We should have increased our hospital capacity, for example, which we're going to get to a little bit later, because there is quite a story there that not a lot of people picked up on this week, and it's quite distressing that they managed to avoid it. But we're going to start off with some good news, some satisfying news. And if you don't enjoy this, then you have the heart of stone and the soul of a vampire. It also is the attaboy. The attaboy this week goes to Dan Andrews, who, of course, joins an illustrious group of attaboy winners that includes the Taliban, so he'll feel right at home, and Queensland MPs who now have a totalitarian to aspire to. He gets the attaboy for forgetting his mask, which has earned him two $200 fines. Two fines because people have gone through their old video footage and found other instances, and hopefully this really starts to rack up pretty soon. Of course, for a premier, $400 doesn't go anywhere near filling an Aldi bag, but to me, this fine highlights the ridiculousness of COVID theatre. So the story broke on the 8th of October that Dan Andrews, the leader who has overseen the world's longest and toughest lockdowns, and has not been held to account by the media for, incidentally, for letting his police force beat the crap out of its own citizens who've been locked up for so long. No wonder they got shirty. And then he let them fire rubber bullets at his voters. So that's some nice third world stuff there. Well done, Dan. And look, if you are in Victoria and you let this go unpunished at the polls, then I don't know what to say to you. A premier letting his militarised police fire on citizens cannot be let stand. And yet, it seems to be, he seems to have gotten away with it. If Morrison had done, people still talk about when they had security guards at the docks when Peter Reith was trying to put some efficiencies on the wharves in Australia. They still talk about the dogs on the wharfs. And here's Dan Andrews pepper spraying, shooting his own. Yep, you deserve what you get, good and hard. So Andrews apologised on Friday for failing to wear a mask as he walked towards a press pack waiting at the back doors of Parliament House on Wednesday and Thursday. He said he had removed his mask as an oversight after leaving his car before walking towards the news cameras and reporters, and he said everyone needed to follow the public health orders. And the mask brouhaha came as Victorian Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton announced that students from grades 3 and above, would be required to wear masks indoors when schools reopened throughout October. But they won't be having to wear them when they're outdoors, such as in the playground and at lunchtime, presumably because it makes eating harder. But in my opinion, Andrews should not have been penalised. For a start, he was outside. He was walking alone, and he was double vaxxed. On the same day, though, we got to enjoy Dan Andrews eating a $200 sandwich twice. Victoria set a record of 1,838 new cases, a record it has since broken. There were 620 Victorians in hospital with COVID on that day. There were 114 in ICU, and there were 76 on a ventilator. Only 8% were fully vaccinated. Now, we don't know about underlying health conditions which may make people more susceptible to illness and hospitalisation. And we know, for example, in the ACT, someone died last week who was in their 70s. And the Chief Minister here, Andrew Barr, gave a very warm, very heartfelt commentary about it, saying that, we've lost somebody aged 70. That is sad. It is sad that somebody at 70 died of COVID. The 70-year-old who died in the ACT was in palliative care receiving end-of-life treatment. She is now one of 6 deaths in the ACT. But I'm sorry, but not all deaths are equal. If you are receiving end-of-life care, you are not dying of COVID, you are dying with COVID. Because the end-of-life care was not related to the COVID. You see what I mean? So a lot of these figures are simply not accurate. They're true, but they're not accurate. And I think now that we've decided nationally, or at least in the eastern states, that we have to learn to live with COVID, which is something we've been saying here for quite some time, now that people are finally accepting, even in Victoria, that you've got to learn to live with COVID, perhaps we can have some more honesty in these figures. And it is an incentive to government that they're not in the business now of scaring us. Scaring us was to get us to stay at home. Scaring us was to put on our masks, to socially distance, to accept the totalitarian draconian measures. The fear was to get us to vaccinate. And they've used every stick they can to get us to vaccinate. And I had my second AstraZeneca over the weekend, and I survived and slept for 12 hours. Longest I've slept for a while. Wasn't a great sleep, but survived. Hooray. But the reason I brought up that Dan Andrews was double vaxxed is because we know that most people, if they are vaxxed and they get COVID, they are either likely to be asymptomatic, in which case COVID isn't affecting them to a degree that they would say, I'd better go and get a test, or the COVID presents itself as a cold. It is so mild. So mathematically, Dan Andrews presented practically zero risk. So why is he still wearing a mask? Why is Joe Biden still wearing a stupid mask? Okay, it stops him from talking so much. Great. He shouldn't be wearing a mask. Not now that he's just been triple vaxxed. But the reason they all wear the masks is for the theatre. And when you watch the presses, when you watch the press conferences each day, they dramatically walk to the lectern, remove their mask, get on with it, put their mask back on and walk off. And then they remove it when the cameras aren't there. It's theatre. It is designed to let you know how serious it is. But you know how serious it is. We all know how serious it is. I keep hearing this thing about, they keep talking about putting these people with COVID on TV and saying this is for people who don't believe COVID is real. Who doesn't believe COVID is real? Who? I mean, these are probably the same people who think the earth is flat, in which case you can't talk to these people. They are beyond stupid. No one thinks COVID doesn't exist. Where there is doubt, this is like the climate change argument. There are plenty of people who have their doubts about how severe it is, about what the costs are going to be, whether we have to take steps right now, no matter the cost. They're not deniers. I'm not a denier. Andrew Bolt is not a denier. Every single person accepts that climate change is real. The question is, what can we do about it? In what time frame? At what cost? There are no COVID skeptics. We know it exists. The question is this the best mitigation technique? At what cost? And for how long? And I know that the people in Victoria know that it's real and they take it seriously because the poor bastards have been 250 days in lockdown to 2 weeks to slow the spread. They don't think they know it's real? Being locked down for almost, what's that, almost 40 weeks? Not quite 40 weeks, 36 weeks. They know it's serious. New South Wales knows how serious it is because they've been in lockdown for 100 days. I know how serious it is in the ACT because we're about to clock up 70 days. The theatre isn't showing us it's serious. It highlights that these clowns are the worst actors in history. This play sucks and we want our money back. Or at least let us throw some damn tomatoes at you sorry mugs, preferably in cans. But Andrews is not the worst. He's just been the slimiest and the meanest. The most incompetent has been Anastasia Unspellable in Queensland. You see, there were, in fact, 2 points to the lockdown. The first you know about, this was to flatten the curve, slow the spread, which in Victoria has been an unbelievable failure with Delta. The second reason we did the lockdown was to prepare a health response. The fear, the great fear, was that we would see what they saw overseas, where hospitals, people were dying in corridors. Remember, there was this great fear that they sent a hospital ship to New York Harbour. No one ever went on that hospital ship. The mayor of New York said, we need 100,000 ventilators. Well, they never used them. So the idea was that we prepare, because Australia had time because we could shut our borders. We said, prepare the hospitals. The biggest failure in Australia has been Anastasia Palaszczuk. And this is unbelievable. Now, in the ACT, we spent about $23 million on what we call the Surge Centre. It was our insurance policy. We spent $23 million to build a temporary hospital that provided 50 ICU beds. And thankfully, it has been unused. They used it temporarily as a vaccination centre. Maybe it still is. But nobody went there with COVID. But that was our insurance policy. $23 million. A few people call it a white elephant. To me, that's money well spent. Because had we needed it, it was there. We used the time efficiently to create a safety net. That was one of the points of the lockdown. Get a load of this. This is from the ABC on Wednesday last week, 6th of October. Earlier this week, 4 major North Queensland hospitals sounded code yellow alarms in unison, signalling major capacity issues across Cairns, Townsville, Mackay and Mount Isa public health systems. The representative union, Together Queensland, for God's sake, said there were 280 presentations to the Cairns Hospital on Tuesday, just shy of its busiest day ever, which led to the service calling its 15th code yellow of the year, which by my count is about once every 1.5 weeks, maybe? More than that. Further west, Mount Isa also had to put its elective surgeries and procedures on hold. The Australasian College of Emergency Medicine said it was not unusual for the Western Centre, which spends about 40% of its time in code yellow. Staff shortages in the wake of domestic and international border closures have been an issue across regional Queensland for some time. There are now concerns about the regional health system. How will it cope if there is a COVID-19 outbreak? Now, in the ACT, coming back to us, when our cases started to rise about 4 or 5 weeks ago, the health department here put out a call. They said, if you are a nurse, why don't you come back to the health system? We'll train you up, make sure you're up to current standards, and we will deploy you. Because what happens is, sick people, here's the other thing that is not in this article. People with COVID, asymptomatic people, go to the hospital. There might be a patient going in for surgery. They might be going to visit somebody. They might be a carer. You don't know why. But, for example, here in the ACT at the moment, we have 2 babies with COVID because there is a carer in the infant ward. Thankfully, it wasn't the NICU, but it was another infant ward. So children have come down with COVID, which means the hospital is also, basically that ward is off limits now. But this is why you use that time to get more nurses so you aren't completely running out of them. Fairly simple, except it seems, in Queensland. So here's the dirty little secret. There is no nursing shortage. There is a shortage of people who want to be nurses, but there are thousands of people in the community trained, ready to go as nurses. All you've got to do is throw money at them. It may be a little bit more complicated than that, but a lot of people leave nursing, they can't find a reason to go back until something like this, and the pathway's made easy for them. Now, if a jurisdiction like the ACT, which has 3 people and a Cocker Spaniel, if we can figure this out, what the hell has been going on in Queensland? Cairns Hospital anaesthetist Dr. Sandy Donald, Senior Vice President of Together Queensland, said he had never seen all 4 hospitals code yellow at the same time. He said authorities should be especially concerned given coronavirus outbreaks are not affecting the regions at present. No COVID patients in Queensland. Hospitals are full. Anastasia Palaszczuk is saying to the federal government, we need more money. Why? What have you been doing with the money you've been getting? No wonder they don't want to open the borders. They are at capacity with 0 COVID patients. 0. So what the hell have they been doing for the past 19 months? Nothing. So before everything became verifiable at these 4 hospitals, here is Anastasia Palaszczuk. After the horses bolted, this was on the 30th of September, here she is saying they need more money. How is she going to build up the capacity at a moment's notice when she's been doing Sweet FA for 18 months, more than that, since the pandemic started? Now they're talking about opening the borders. Now she realises she needs foreigners in her state, i.e. people from New South Wales, Victoria. They need holiday makers. They need tourists from overseas. Now they're going, bugger, we're going to be importing COVID. She's got a very serious decision here. Either she keeps the borders shut and her economy basically becomes North Korea, or she's got to open it up, in which case she's going to pay the consequence of having done nothing. She has created this entirely for herself, but here she is. She's got to find someone to blame. And who do you blame? You always blame the feds.
If it comes in, it will spread like wildfire. Okay, we're already seeing increased surges in New South Wales hospitals and increased surges in Victorian hospitals. So the hospitals need to have the capacity, and that requires on additional funding coming from the federal government to support the growth in the numbers that we will see.
No. What it requires is that you spend more time delivering frontline services to Queensland instead of, say, employing 30 people to do your public relations, 30 in her office and the department to write media releases for her. Actually, I can almost understand why she's got so many of them. Remember, this is the Premier who earlier in the year said this in defence of sending a woman from Byron Bay down to Sydney to get a flight up to Brisbane. And in that time, I keep bringing up this case, the woman lost one of her twin babies because of the policies of Anastasia Palaszczuk. That incident was just a week after Palaszczuk said, people living in New South Wales, they have New South Wales hospitals. In Queensland, we have Queensland hospitals for our people. New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard at the time said Palaszczuk's comments were astonishing and urged her to review her border arrangements to ensure patients receive the health care they need. Well, that's one way to put it. But I don't even think Queenslanders are getting the health care they need because this woman, this Premier, has done nothing in all this time to prepare the state. No wonder she's not eager to open the borders. It's extraordinary. In the rest of the Eastern Seaboard, well, basically in Victoria and New South Wales, there are moves to take powers away from the chief health officers, mainly because the parliamentarians are realising they have got to open up. And they are being governed, they are being controlled by the chief health officers who don't face elections. So the politicians realise, finally, almost as though they've realised that as politicians they have a greater responsibility to the community than just epidemiology, that they should look at the economics, at the mental health welfare, at every single aspect that goes into making a society, not just is there COVID, particularly as the vaccine rates are absolutely shooting through the roof and there are new therapeutics coming on the market. There's one from Merck, which is apparently a bit of a wonder drug. It reduces, hospitalisation by 50%. What a shame they can't deploy it in Queensland for things like road trauma or, shooting somebody. Hospitals are still going to be full. Last week, when New South Wales Premier, the new one, Dominic Perrottet, announced a lessening of the restrictions, there were a lot of breathless reports that the New South Wales Chief Health Officer, Dr. Kerry Chant, wasn't there to hold his hand. Well, that's great, because the Premier is the decision maker. He or she is the decider. But the media lost their poop over it. The Channel 9 reporter, Chris O'Keefe, said, "I have confirmed Dr. Chant did not endorse this new roadmap. The Chief Health Officer warned the New South Wales Premier, these changes come with risk, but the decision was ultimately a matter for the government, a shift from Perrottet away from the quote-unquote health advice." Well, yes, these changes do come with risk. Every single decision government makes comes with risk. And if this new decision from the New South Wales government scares you so much, stay at home. Keep your mask on. Double mask. Make sure you're vaccinated. Maybe get a face shield. Maintain social distancing. Only go out of the house for essential purposes. You'll be fine. Probably. If you are susceptible, if you are immunocompromised, you're probably taking some precautions already, COVID or no COVID. There was a tweet from the widow of the journalist Mark Colvin during the week saying that he had a double kidney transplant, saying that if he'd been alive today, he would probably be in hospital with COVID, dying on his own. That is sad. If that were the case, he died many years ago. But we cannot shut down a society with millions upon millions of people in it for somebody who's had a double kidney transplant. Sorry, you've received an extraordinary gift. Grateful for that. We can't shut down everything for every single person who could be at risk. We have taken enormous steps to minimise the risk at a societal level. We are now at the point where people have to do their best to minimise the risk at a personal level. That's going to be the big difference in the next few weeks. And cases will go up. I suspect I will still be wearing a mask for a few weeks. I want to see what happens to the numbers. I don't think I'm going to be going to bars and hanging around strangers. I don't like hanging around shopping centres anyway. I am looking forward to going to the gym. That is a risk I'm prepared to take. There are risks. We all have to manage them. And I'm glad, finally, that some of these decisions are coming back to people who we can hire or fire. We do not live in a technocracy or a bureaucracy or unelected boffins in the back room, removed from the consequences of their decisions, dictate what governments do. This is not the way it's meant to be. So finally, some sanity is coming back. They're talking about reducing powers of the Chief Health Officer in Victoria. And the fact that Dominic Perrottet, the new New South Wales Premier, has decided to start off this way, I think is good. Maybe it'd be nice to have a bold Premier. Will there be an increase in cases? I can almost guarantee it. That's not exactly what I'm worried about. Hospitalisations and deaths. Deaths of younger people. I hate to be brutal about this, but most of the deaths we experience at the moment are still in the 70s, 80s, 90s. If you're in your 90s, you've probably had a good run. If you haven't had a good run, it's not going to get any better. Is this the right path? Well, there will be more cases. And there are two questions we need to think about. How much longer could we have stayed locked down when the benefit seems to have waned due to Delta? And there are now 2,000 cases almost a day in Victoria, and the lockdowns are severe. So maybe we do need another way. The question is, what is the cost of opening? There are some examples around the world. Let's start with Singapore. Cases in Singapore are at record highs due to Delta. However, over 98% of Singapore's vaccinated cases are mild or have no symptoms. This is the point of shifting our thinking away from cases to hospitalisation and death. In fact, they've had very few deaths despite a surge in national cases. According to their Ministry of Health, over the last 28 days, of the 43,610 infected individuals, 98.3% are mild or have no symptoms, 1.4% require oxygen supplementation, 0.1% require ICU care, and 0.2% have died. Singapore reports vaccine effectiveness of 69% against any infection, 80 to 90% against symptomatic disease, and 93% against severe COVID-19 that requires oxygen supplementation, ICU admission, or results in death. Most Singaporeans, for the record, have received Pfizer or Moderna. So this is about what we've been seeing in Australia as well. About 7% of people do require some assistance. As of October 7, 3 more cases have died from complications due to COVID-19. According to the Ministry of Health, the individuals were aged between 68 and 102. All of them had been unvaccinated against COVID-19 and had various underlying health conditions. One of them was the fact that he was 102, I imagine. In fact, it was probably a woman. But here's an interesting response from To Yik Ting, perfect pronunciation, of the Saw Swee Hock School of Public Health at the National University of Singapore. He said, case numbers may remain high for a few months, but the vast majority will be protected by the vaccines and won't fall seriously ill. The long-term plan against COVID is a combination of vaccination and natural infection to provide protection while not overwhelming hospitals, he said, adding that he does not anticipate an increase in the death rate, but the absolute numbers can be expected to rise. The majority of Singapore's numbers, therefore, could be attributed to nervous residents, apparently, with little or no symptoms overwhelming hospitals. He goes on, the resulting high numbers are causing a lot of anxiety and worry. People are flooding hospitals and GP clinics. This affects healthcare manpower as staff are quarantined and wards are shut down. They go on, a policy of mass testing asymptomatic people, many of whom rush to hospital after a positive, even if free of symptoms, are currently driving Singapore case numbers. This is from OIE. Oh, you've got to be serious. OOIENGEONG. Oi Eng Yong. Seriously, I should get a job at SBS. This person said, instead of infection followed by vaccination, we're going to go vaccination followed by infection, which I think is even better because infections are mostly mild. Experts also say that Singapore's climbing cases, more than half of which are in vaccinated individuals, may signal that COVID-19 circulates in a population like its 4 coronavirus cousins, but doesn't upend lives due to widespread immunity. And as long as deaths remain low, Singapore can set an example of how other countries, especially those that have maintained zero tolerance for COVID-19, can emerge from the pandemic. Singapore's successful vaccination rate has kept severe cases and deaths down. So that's from Singapore. Here's what happened in Norway. They scrapped their restrictions on the 27th of September. This is from news.com.au. Starts off, there are no masks in sight. No talk of vaccine passports. No social distancing markers on the ground, and people are meeting their family and friends for a meal, a movie, or a concert. The only indication that the pandemic ever happened is that there are a couple of COVID testing facility cabins at public places where staff wear face masks. Other than that, Norwegians have reclaimed their lives after the last of their COVID restrictions were confined to the dustbin last week. The announcement by outgoing Prime Minister Erna Solberg took many Norwegians by surprise and is also perhaps one of the reasons there were such chaotic scenes in the capital, Oslo, and elsewhere in the country. Ms. Solberg said on Friday at a news conference, it has been 561 days since we introduced the toughest measures in Norway in peacetime. Now the time has come to return to a normal daily life. Now that was on September 27th. And despite the dismal weather, the Scandinavian countries that have done away with their rules are performing better in avoiding deaths than many developed countries. Any fears of a rise in cases since the reopening in Norway have been slapped back by the early indications in infection numbers. You'll like this. Cases have plummeted 40% in the short time that Norway has reopened, and new daily cases have dropped by 50% in the past 2 weeks. And unlike many other nations that are reopening, Norway will not order its citizens to show proof of vaccination or a negative test result to enter nightclubs, bars or restaurants. Only 67% of the population is fully vaccinated and a further 10% have had a first dose. They lifted all of their restrictions prior to the announcement. The government said there were no longer requirements for digital proof of vaccination, saying the virus is no longer a socially critical disease. Around 75% of the Danish population is fully vaccinated, with at least 77% having received at least one dose. The fully vaccinated include around 96% of people aged over 50. Cases have dropped in Denmark 40% since restrictions were lifted 3 weeks ago. Now, that is not to say the same impact is going to occur in Australia. We've already seen in Sydney that some local government areas where they have a higher concentration of non-English speakers, compliance has been lower. Now, whether that's the message isn't getting through about what they need to do, or they're in larger family groups, and what happens is it gets into a family group and it just spreads like wildfire because they spend so much time together, they have larger households, it transmits faster. There are lots of factors as to why some communities are more susceptible than others. And the impact in Australia may be different from what was seen in the Scandinavian countries. We are not comparable societies. However, we have tried in Victoria draconian lockdown, curfews, travel restrictions, the whole shebang. And the rates keep rising. But now, the rates don't matter so much. The infections don't matter. It's how many people are going to hospital, how many people are dying. And there is now more control available to you to not contract COVID. Or if you do contract it, to contract it less seriously and have it impact as a cold. In which case, the pandemic is over. Let's return to normal. The challenge will be Do our politicians have the guts to stay the course, or will they shut everything down at the first instance? But with vaccination rates nearing 80%, in the ACT, 97% of people have had, over the age of 12, have had one dose, and the data indicates if you get one dose, you will get a second dose. So we will be 97% vaccinated in a couple of weeks. It is time to get back to normal. And on that high note, we leave the breakdown, the week that went for the week that was. If you haven't subscribed through Apple, through Stitcher, through Google, through Spotify, please do so. It means you'll get the breakdown hot and fresh in your inbox Monday morning, 6 a.m. And what a way to start the week. Is there any better? There is, but I can't help you. We are on the email at feedme@dailybreakdown.com.au. We are on the web at dailybreakdown.com.au. And as usual, the show notes will be up on Monday night. That'll be about 10 o'clock on the 11th of October. Just, in case you need something to do after Media Watch. Where else? We're on the Facebook at Daily Breakdown AU. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Please stay safe. And if you happen to come across a story that you think, I know a certain angry person who'd love to hear that, please make sure you send it to feedme@dailybreakdown.com.au, or you can contact me through the Facebook. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. For the love of God, stay safe. And until next week, goodbye.